documentation before he touched anything. I told him if he touched one tire on my tractor without a court order I'd sue him so fast his license plate would melt. That got him to stop. Then, like a perfectly timed sitcom twist, a county sheriff's cruiser rolled up behind the SUV. The deputies had apparently gotten my call from last night and decided to swing by when I mentioned possible trespassing. The lead deputy stepped out and strolled over like he was enjoying the drama, hand resting casually on his belt. He looked at the HOA crew and then at me and asked what the situation was. I told him the short version: towing threats, unauthorized enforcement, false jurisdiction. The deputy asked the HOA reps for their paperwork. They handed him a printed map and a violation notice. He read it over slowly, then looked up and asked where their authorization from the county was. They stammered something about expansion and provisional oversight, but they couldn't show a single official document. Just their own internal guidelines and that same shaky red map. The deputy turned to me and asked if I had my zoning doc. I nodded and handed him the copy I kept in the truck glove box. He read through it, nodded again, and turned back to the HOA with a voice that was suddenly all business. He told them flat out that they had no legal authority on this land, and any attempt to tow property from it would be considered theft and trespassing. The tow truck driver looked immensely relieved and started backing his truck out before anyone could argue. The deputy told the HOA reps that if they came back without a county order they'd be escorted off the land in cuffs. The three of them turned red with a mix of rage and embarrassment, especially the woman with the clipboard who tried to argue about visual consistency and property values. The deputy cut her off and said this isn't a cul-de-sac. This is a working farm. Once they were gone, I thanked the deputy and offered him a cold bottle of water from the barn fridge. He said he'd keep an eye on things and wished me luck. As he drove off, I sat back down on the tractor seat and let the engine run a few more minutes. Not because I needed to, just because I could. That night, I laminated a copy of the sheriff's report and tacked it onto the inside wall of my barn, right above the feed bins. A reminder that even when the suits come knocking, sometimes a good old-fashioned lawman still does the right thing. The next few days were quiet. No drones. No flyers. No SUV on the gravel. It almost felt too quiet. I used the time to reinforce my fencing and add an extra no trespassing sign to the back entrance by the creek. Joe called to say he hadn't seen them either, but he had noticed a couple of unmarked cars idling near the edge of his tree line. It seemed the HOA was regrouping, probably licking their wounds and planning their next move. That's when I got an idea. I spent that afternoon painting a fresh sign and setting it up at the front gate where it was impossible to miss. It said Private AG Zone, no access beyond this point. HOA members will be recorded and reported. Underneath it I screwed in a motion-activated camera disguised inside an old birdhouse. If they came back, I'd catch them from every angle. Later that week, I drove into town and stopped by the local diner for a sandwich. As I was eating, I overheard two men at the next table talking about Green Pines. One of them mentioned that their HOA fees had gone up again. The other said he'd heard the board was trying to expand into nearby land to increase revenue. I kept eating but made a mental note to follow the money trail. If the HOA was using expansion to pad their budget, then this was more than a power trip. It was a business strategy, and a crooked one at that. That night, I reviewed all my camera footage again, checking for any gaps or suspicious activity. Nothing new yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. People like that don't just walk away when they get embarrassed. They stew. They plot. And when they come back bolder. I wasn't scared. I was ready. They wanted a war over a tractor. They were going to get a war over the truth. And I had the land, the law, and a little something called common sense on my side. The silence didn't last long. Just before sunrise 3 days later, I woke to the strange buzz of something unnatural slicing through the early morning stillness. At first I thought it might be a hawk circling low, but when I stepped outside, coffee in hand, I spotted the source hovering near the barn. A black drone with blinking red lights zipped around like it owned the air above my pasture. It dipped low enough to skim the roof of my tractor, then shot up to capture a full aerial view of the back field. I narrowed my eyes and watched it closely, standing still in the gravel, heart thudding with a different kind of alertness. That thing wasn't just out for a scenic joyride. It was recording something, and I had a pretty good guess who sent it. I didn't throw a rock, though the temptation was strong. Instead, I walked straight to the barn, grabbed my phone, and started recording the drone as it hovered. I followed it across the sky with my lens until it zipped away back toward the road. It vanished over the tree line near the edge of my property. I pulled the trail cam footage later and sure enough, I caught a figure in a tan polo shirt retrieving the drone beside a silver hatchback. They didn't even try to be sneaky. That confirmed it. The HOA had moved into a new phase. If they couldn't bully me face to face, they were going to start spying from a distance. That same afternoon, I received a thick envelope in the mail. No stamp, just shoved through the gate slot. It contained a typed notice on Green Pine's HOA letterhead, warning me of an environmental impact review triggered by excessive livestock waste runoff and improper storage of large equipment. The phrasing was legalistic and smug. The threat was clear. If I didn't remove the tractor and reduce my herd size, I would be fined up to $12,000 for violating Community Preservation Code. I held the paper between two fingers like it was toxic and set it down on my porch table. I didn't know whether to laugh or light it on fire. Livestock waste on a farm. That was like fining the ocean for being wet. Instead of reacting, I scanned the document and emailed it straight to my cousin Robbie. He replied in minutes with one sentence. They just shot themselves in the foot. He told me the HOA had now made a legal claim they couldn't support, especially on property that wasn't under their jurisdiction. It meant I had grounds to file a formal harassment complaint and potentially take them to court for damages. But we weren't there yet. First, I needed to keep gathering. I printed copies of the drone footage and added it to my growing binder. The front cover now read HOA incursion log in black marker. I added timestamps, GPS coordinates from the drone path, and matched it with the trail cam image of the person collecting it. I even ran the plate number through a contact at the county to confirm it belonged to one of the Green Pines board members. Everything was stacking up. They weren't just overreaching anymore. They were orchestrating a campaign of intimidation. Later that week, Sarah, the local reporter, called and asked if she could come by again. I agreed. When she arrived, I handed her the envelope, the drone video, and the newest notices. She was speechless for a moment, then asked if I minded going public with all of it. I told her I wanted it in the open. I wasn't hiding and I wasn't scared. She said the paper would run a full piece in the Sunday edition and might even pitch it to a regional news station if the story grew. I told her it was already growing. She just smiled and said then it's time someone started trimming the weeds. That night, I sat on the porch under a sky full of stars thinking about my grandfather. He built the first section of our barn with his own hands, hauling lumber with a mule team before there were even proper roads out here. He always said land is sacred when it feeds your family and costs you your back. He'd have laughed himself hoarse if he knew someone wanted to fine us for cow manure. But he'd also tell me to keep my boots on and never let a bully stomp your boundary lines. The next day, I noticed something odd near the backfield. 2 small markers had been staked into the ground with plastic flags, one red, one blue. They hadn't been there yesterday. I walked over and pulled one up. Attached to it was a laminated card marked Property Line Review in Progress. I turned around and scanned the horizon. A silver SUV idled on the shoulder of the nearby road. I recognized the woman in the driver's seat, one of the clipboard crew. I waved the card in the air, and she drove off without hesitation. By sundown, I had set up a third motion camera aimed directly at the backfield and installed a second sign, this one reading "You flag it, you claim it, I bury it." The flagging didn't return the next day or the next, but it didn't matter. The HOA wasn't retreating. They were regrouping. The pressure was just changing shape. When Sunday came, the newspaper article dropped like a hay bale off a roof. The front page headline read "Local Farmer Fights HOA Invasion," and the piece was scathing. It laid out everything: the fake towing order, the drone surveillance, the bogus fine, the map overreach, even the chicken scratch zoning expansion attempt. Sarah had included pictures, quotes, and legal opinions from Robbie about jurisdiction violation. The town erupted with chatter. At the feed store, people clapped me on the back. At church, someone slipped me a batch of oatmeal cookies with a note that said "Keep swinging." By Monday, I had 3 more farmers from nearby counties email me with similar stories. 2 had given in. 1 had moved. None had fought back. Until now. Joe called that evening and said he saw the HOA president herself standing near the back lot of Green Pines, yelling on her phone and pacing like a hen who lost her eggs. Whatever plan they had was unraveling fast. But I knew better than to let my guard down. A cornered animal lashes out harder, and people with power don't like losing it in public. I was making waves, and those waves were headed right for their neatly trimmed little world. But I wasn't afraid. I had cameras, documents, neighbors, and now the press. All I needed was one more mistake from them, one more arrogant move, and I'd have everything I needed to crush their case for good. And knowing them, that move was coming soon. The knock on my front door came just after lunch, while I was shelling peas on the porch. I looked up expecting the mailman or maybe Joe, but instead I saw her. The HOA president herself stood there in khaki slacks, a pearl necklace, and that same smug expression she wore in the local paper photo from a fundraiser 2 months back. She didn't flinch when I stood up and crossed the porch toward her. She held a folder under one arm and what looked like a citation pad in the other. Her mouth moved into a tight smile like she was doing me a favor by showing up in person. I said nothing at first, just leaned against the porch rail and waited for her to speak. She opened with the usual nonsense, saying she was here to offer me a final opportunity to come into voluntary compliance before things escalated further. I didn't ask what she meant by escalate. I just told her calmly that she was trespassing and had 60 seconds to get off my property or I'd be calling the sheriff again. Instead of leaving, she stepped forward and waved the citation pad like it held the word of God. She claimed I was now in violation of a newly adopted neighborhood unity policy that governed structure aesthetics, noise control, and property use. I asked her plainly if she was out of her mind. She said she had full legal authority over the expanded area and that my refusal to acknowledge it was a personal grievance against her leadership. I was about to tell her to turn around and walk back to her air-conditioned fantasy world when she said something that stopped me cold. She said she had video footage of unlicensed activity happening on my land. She said the drone captured what looked like large-scale dumping and structural instability near the east pasture. I stared at her hard, heart beating faster, not because I was guilty but because I realized what she was doing. She was setting up a false narrative to justify legal action, fabricating violations that didn't exist to muddy the waters and intimidate me into submission. I asked to see the footage. She said she'd present it at the next compliance hearing. I told her there wouldn't be one. She said we'll see about that and turned on her heel like she'd won something. I followed her halfway down the path toward her car. When she reached the gate, I said loud enough for her to hear that every second of her visit had been recorded and I'd be submitting it to my lawyer. She paused just a second before unlocking her door. That pause told me everything. She wasn't bluffing. She was escalating. And now I needed to do the same. The next call I made was to Robbie. I told him everything and asked what our next legal move should be. He said we had more than enough to file for a cease and desist order and possibly a temporary restraining order against her and the entire HOA board. He also told me to consider contacting a real estate fraud investigator. If they were knowingly expanding without legal right and issuing false fines, we could drag them into court on multiple fronts. I liked the sound of that. I liked it a lot. Before hanging up, Robbie told me something that stuck. He said she's betting on fear. Bullies